Peace, y'all. Good to see y'all. This is Brother Lee and Brother Eric back with CHUCG TALK, your favorite payday show.
Yeah.
We'll skip the lunch complaints today because essentially nobody's listening. We've learned that in the first all of the episodes. So today, our topic of the day will be maroons and food. So we'll talk about maroons, we'll talk about foods, we'll talk about their farming and self-sustainability ways as well. But before we do that, please allow me to introduce y'all for the joke of today. How do you fix a broken tomato?
You patch it up.
With tomato paste.
With tomato paste? You really gonna do this with a straight? Okay, all right. Tomato paste. Glue it back together. That was a really good one. All right. What we talking about today?
For all my broken tomatoes. Today we're talking about maroons and food. And those who aren't familiar, we'll talk about maroon communities, what they are, how they became, and also their relations to food, self-sustainability. So, Brother Eric, would you like to start us off? Just for generally sharing your perspective on maroons.
Absolutely. I'll give a little bit of history. I'll give a bit of relationship to food. And if I'm honest with you, I'm so excited about this. This is like one of the most, I always say this every time we talk about topics that I'm always excited about. But I really am excited about this. I told a couple brothers recently, man, that I'm trying to become a hood scholar on Maroon Societies. And partially because I think that it's important for how we build towards freedom. Maroon communities or Maroon societies aren't the only way to models for liberation, but I think that they are at some level one of the North Stars that will get us there. I think we have to, as we talk about, study movements, not men and women. You know what I'm saying? We gotta be able to do that. So anyway, Maroon societies or Maroon communities are these communities that essentially developed out of necessity. Their focus is on re-liberation. These are people who are like, look, enslavement is not my destiny. I wasn't born a slave. I wasn't born enslaved. Or even if I was born enslaved, that's not my destiny. That's not where my ancestors come from. I want to re-liberate myself. And so the whole concept of the runaway slave, the question is, where did the runaway slave go to? Now, one path, of course, for some people, they went up north to find free places where they could actually be free. In some cases, people got their freedom through what they call manumission or whatever, like literally writing out saying that, hey, I'm free, they got a pass. And then some people actually got their freedom by fighting for it and remaining free within a context of slavery, outside of the plantation life, but definitely connected to the plantation life. And growing one's own food was essential, and I think very important, and we'll talk about that in a second. And also being able to utilize food as a means to heal and as a means to trade with other people to heal and bring resources to the society was really important. So I'll first talk about food, right? And if you're gonna maintain a free community, if you're gonna have what Baba Ed Whitfield talks about as liberated zones, you have to be able to feed yourself. You can't be free if you can't feed yourself. Maroon communities ultimately were these communities that were largely populated by Africans, but also by indigenous peoples, as we celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day today as we film. But then also, in some cases, white indentured servants who were like, look, we ain't doing that no more. And in those communities, what you saw were people finding ways to expand the possibilities on terrain that ultimately some people saw as not possible to live in. Mountains, swamps, valleys, through different places where essentially it was like, can't nothing live there. People found ways not only to build their homes and build lives, but they actually were able to manipulate the soil and manipulate certain areas to grow food. And depending on where you were, Maroon communities existed throughout the United States, the so-called United States of America, Latin America, all throughout the African diaspora, where there was the enslavement of Africans, there were people who said, hell no, we won't go. And so growing their own food was important. You had garden patches. In some cases, you had space where people had communal, gardens and spaces where people could grow their food. And then in other cases, learned from the indigenous people how to live from the land for so-called wild foods as well. So foraging, hunting, all these different practices, and as well as having medicine, right? So developing a whole intricate system of medicine of how to heal yourself with what is available, but then also utilizing what they grew, what they foraged, what they hunted to trade with other people to bring other resources that they needed for their regular survival, including weapons and other things. And so food wasn't just essential to how people lived, but also in terms of how, lived for sustenance, fed yourself, but also for how people actually were able to engage with the plantation society, if you will, to trade with people. But in amazing ways, they were Maroon citizens were able to figure out a way to engage with folks without engaging with the plantation system, because as you can imagine, or I should say engaging directly, because if you can imagine, if you were to go directly, they probably would try to bring you back to, becoming a slave. So anyway, or being enslaved. So they found out different ways to protect themselves, to produce a kind of enclosed, insulated system of survival, of liberation, but also of figuring out ways to connect with the outside world. And food was central to both of those things, you know what I'm saying? So, other things too, but, medicine, sustenance, and trade, those are really important functions of food in Maroon societies.
And I'll be quick so we can get to some of the bell questions, but I think one of the most interesting and significant things about the Maroon communities are that they had to organize in a way that was sustainable. And now understand that we see sustainable, we have a different narrative or perspective, if you will, of sustainable today, because we're in an era of convenience, if you will.
Right.
But if you understand how Maroons had to get their food, if you understand how they had to hunt, if you understand how I've also read that they, raided plantations to bring resources and food and weapons
Seeds.
and everything back. Absolutely. So I say that to say is that it's one thing to understand you need to build yourself a system that's sustainable and organize it in a way that everybody stays healthy, that everybody is healthy enough to do their role. You got to make sure the foods you're eating are the right foods that are going to sustain the folks you need to be there. You got to make sure the routes and the paths you're taking can't be traced, and it's just so intentional. You peel back all the layers. These folks understood what it meant to survive, right? True tactics of survival and true liberation, if you will. So I just think that's amazing, and I think that's something that we need to adopt immediately is organizing. I guess what I would say with urgency and understanding that any given day, this thing has to be able to be lifted up and be mobilized to a whole different area, essentially. And that's what one of the things that really is super mind blowing for me with the Maroons with food is that their farming was so effective but so light. They were always ready to go. And it's you're feeding all of these people. You know what I mean? You all work together in securing all of this food. And every time you all are ready to move, and you know what I mean. It's never a setback either. It's always if they move with or without the food, you're right back at square one because the system works, and everybody's healthy and everybody moves. You know what I mean. So I think it's just amazing. You talk about liberation, that's undefeatable almost, if you will. So that's one of the things that really
building food culture was it, right? Exactly what you said. It's not just the types of food you ate and how you prepared it, but it's like you said, the nimbleness. It's being able to say, "Yo, we gotta move out, grab this stuff," right? Being able to build a food culture that was very much about not just nomadic people, develop cultures where essentially preserving food was important, but it's also Maroon societies were always at a state of war.
Absolutely.
Even during peace times, they had to their food cultures and cultures in general were about resilience and being on the lookout. It was always. To be honest, and I know I'm gonna flip the script a little bit, but I think the closest example that we have, dramatized example, is The Walking Dead. And I ain't trying to do no promotion, but I'm saying that The Walking Dead, you literally had to create communities that were literally about protection.
That's what rides to the mind for me as well. Yeah.
So here's the thing: in the same way, so food also was a weapon on both sides, right? So you think about Queen Nanny of the Maroons in Jamaica, right? Queen Nanny used food or medicine to kill folks who were trying to take their freedom away.
Right.
That was important. But also on the other side, one of the first things that people would destroy if they were coming to destroy Maroon Societies were their garden patches and their communal eating. They knew that if they got to the people's food sources, they could get to the people. And the people, they had to, what's the word? Like, if you had to smoke them out, that's what you would go to first.
No,
I got you. Food was a weapon. It was essential because it was like you can't survive as a people without it. So I think, to your point, building culture that's about like not just sustainability in the sense that like it grows from the earth, but it literally is like thinking about mobility and how do we keep this along the way, how you feed all these people. You know what I'm saying? So anyway, and protect it at the same way. So.
Yeah, man. No, that's amazing, man. That's we're gonna dig into some more Bell questions and talk more about it. But I think. Man, I think they just have so many. You talk about liberation, man. It's a blatant, it's a blueprint. So, without further ado, let's get to it.
No question.
It's a good bell hit too, man. It's a good bell hit. So, question number 1 from Jared. Let's see. What were some specific farming tactics that were essential to survival? So I think that was that's a good question, Jared. But I think that's exactly what we were actually just talking about. And even to say more about it, like I said, I think urgency is like you said, they were always at war. You know what I mean? Even in a state of peace. You know what I mean? You think about securing and preserving enough food and knowing that you can't really sleep at night. You know what I mean? It's a different understanding and different role and different kind of security that you got to build and organize for when you think about survival. And I think that's one thing folks kind of take for granted is that, you know what I mean, we have this leisure, or we under this idea of what it means to be free, you know what I mean, in this country.
Yeah.
And it's like, what is really free, right? And what do you do with this idea of free? Because so far free has been...
asked that question.
Right, was free, right? Was free. Because so far free has been contingent on what they said we could have.
Right.
Right?
Defined by somebody.
Not defined by somebody else.
Hey, bro.
And that's what you know what I mean? So it's like, it was free. You know what I mean? So when you talk about survival, that's freedom. Yeah. When you're up against that, that's freedom. Because you got something to lose now. Yeah. Here, you're contingent, like I said, upon what's given to you. You're contingent upon the capacity that's allowed to you. Yeah. And I think that's where the separation happens. So when I think about the farming piece, and that's what I was essentially saying before, the urgency around the food, man, to understand what kind of food, to understand where, to understand, you know what I mean, even the micro aspects of it, how far the food has to be from the home. You know what I mean? Like, just understanding how it can be used as a weapon, how it shows up in your vulnerability. Yeah. You know what I mean? So all of those things, you're talking about building a real, genuine, spiritual relationship with food and understanding it's essential, how it's essential to life for you. You know what I mean? How it plays a role in your whole community. So I think that's just powerful.
At the basis, as you talked about survival, right? Mm-hmm. I think that's important. And you talk about a spiritual relationship that's based on survival.
Yes.
Right? It's what, in my opinion, what is the most genuine relationship you have with the thing if it's not about survival, right? So if you talk about loving the earth because the earth's health is my health and vice versa, right?
Yes,
like seeing the interconnectedness. Mm-hmm. Part of that has to do with the values and the ethos of the people, but part of it literally is pragmatic and practical. Mm-hmm. If I don't do this, we don't survive, right? So to that point, I think, you know, we talk about food cultures but also like, building culture, people don't talk about it like this. Creating culture is a thing. Mm-hmm. What Maroon Societies had to do was create culture, including developing new technologies for how to grow food. Mm-hmm. Imagine having to grow tomatoes in a place that, essentially swamps, like with swamps, exactly. So what they were able to use was like the mossy areas weren't the areas that you could grow in, but they could take the soil. And these were like specifically those in swamps. Mm-hmm. In the southern part of this country, There's one area in particular called the Dismal Swamp.
Okay.
And so in that particular maroon community, what you had were literally people taking plant nutrients from the swamp and from the earth floor to bring to their gardens to actually what we would consider as compost, right? So creating new technologies out of necessity.
Right.
Same thing on the mountainside. Being able to grow where the sun is in different areas, right? So that takes a bit of what people have considered and called agroecology, right? Or Afroecology.
True.
That is learning what the space is and building based on the space that we have available. So learning that if the sun comes this way, our food should be here. Like you said, proximity to the house. So if food can grow here, then I should build my house here, right? How close are we to water? What's in that water, right? So you think about different cuisines. If you think about different cuisine with like gator, right? Gator is a part of it. And turtles or whatever, that's what you had to eat, so people manipulated that. With that being said, that speaks to the genius of the people in figuring out how to build cultures and cuisines based on that survival. And having that spiritual relationship to it and building ritual around
respecting it. Absolutely.
In addition to that, what you have literally, based on like building off what you were talking about, is this new relationship with a thing. So when you had maroon communities come together, you weren't talking about people who came from the same plantation or same place. You got to teach each other language. You got new language that evolves. You got new, food cultures that evolving. New ways of doing
skills, everything.
Architecture, new skills. So now you're taking what was these many different things and turning them into one. So when you talk about the question that Jared asked, I think is important when you think about not just farming, but all these other techniques. Talking about literally building from some things and building from nothing all at the same time to create something.
Absolutely.
That in some cases, to be honest, some maroon communities ain't survived.
That's what I was just about to say. You talk about moving the needle, right? And today, in our comfortable society today, the needle doesn't get moved, you're essentially stuck. In their society, if the needle doesn't move, you die.
Exactly.
That's it.
Or you move it in another way.
Exactly.
So and that was the thing that I was thinking about.
It's a different kind of. Man.
You up against a different kind of gun or whatever you call it. Like you up against different situations. So when you talk about convenience, I think the important thing is to note that for them, it wasn't about convenience. It was about, as you said, survival. And if survival was at the end, is at the basis, the question is when you said what's free, it has to be an evolving definition. The concept of freedom is one thing, but the operationalizing of freedom looks different depending on where you at any given moment. Like you talked about before. So freedom might look like this today, but if they shooting guns, freedom look like this. If we go to a new place, freedom looks like this. So as we think about movement, we have to be clear that our definition of our mission, our vision, all of this can't be static. It has to evolve as the people evolve, as our needs evolve, right? We got to be willing to do whatever it takes. So anyway.
That's the same way they did. No, that's amazing, man. That's amazing. Thank you, Jared, for that good question. Our second question, get this bell up here so we can get it. Ariel, so how is maroon farming relevant today?
Maroon farming is relevant today, I think, simply to what you said earlier. Honestly, it's just like we need to see farming, I think, from an agroecology standpoint. We need to be able to understand the land that we have access to and make sure that we realize that it's about a spiritual relationship. How can I be the best steward for you? How can you be the best producer for me? And then I think that's important. And then also in general, thinking about resilience. What can I do with what I have right now? Not what I wish I had, not based on the definition that other people gave that you're talking about, which is the reason why I denounced the term justice. Justice is about being defined by other people. Equity is about what we need, in any given moment. But I think that's what it's about, building, I think that there's something about resilience and building farming that is close to the earth, that's quote unquote sustainable, and that is about having that spiritual relationship, and connected to survival.
Yeah, for sure. I agree. I think part of the farming piece and how food played such a big role in their survival, it should be the same for us today. And essentially, you think about it. The relationships we have with food, and I would like to say that happy to say that while we don't have always prioritized relationships with food, there are a lot of folks who have those spiritual relationships with food. However, I think our when you get to that step, I think your next step should be to understand your a full spiritual relationship with food, because we're looking at the Maroon communities and how they use it as a weapon and how they use it as for survival. You know what I mean? How they use it for bait and all these different tactics. And we know food today of just to fill our stomachs and move.
Yep.
You know what I mean? We don't understand what food can heal us. What food you can leave on your skin for 2 or 3 hours and it takes away. You know what I mean? That rash and things of that nature. So. It's a lot, man. We can keep digging a lot deeper on the Maroon community, but we'll go ahead and tie it down today, and maybe we do another section on this at some point when we start potentially our podcast later and things of that nature, or something like that.
Yeah, I think so for sure, man. At least if I can say this one last thing, I think there's more attention that needs to be given to Maroon communities.
Right.
As it relates to the liberation of African peoples in the 21st century. Because I think that there's a lot that we can learn from, not just food, but also relationship to the land itself, relationship to one another, and just like, relationship to oppression, right? Like that, like you said, like, if we could simulate the type of situation that our ancestors were in, imagine what we could do other than being comfortable, right? So if my pursuit is getting a job, when I get a job, I'm done. But what if my pursuit is to be liberated?
Right.
That job ain't enough. I gotta go to the next level. You feel me? So I just feel like more attention need to be given to Maroon communities and how Maroon communities shaped how we struggle. Right. Like that's a key tool and element. And I think, as you talked about, getting down to the nitty gritties of how it operates, like food, land, relationships. All of these things, if we study it, that's why I said I need to be a hood scholar on Maroons, because, like, if we know the nitty gritty and we study those movements throughout the African diaspora, then we have more nuggets that are available for us when we're thinking about our organizing.
Yeah. No, I agree, man. I agree, man. Well, let's wrap it up, man. I thank y'all for watching. I appreciate y'all sharing questions. Please chime in, share more questions with us, give us feedback, pushbacks, everything. We'll see you on your next payday, October 30th. We'll be talking about one of our 5 initiatives area. We'll talk about People's Urban Agriculture area. So looking forward to that. Follow us at Black Yield on Instagram, at Black Yield on Twitter, Black Yield Institute on Facebook as well. Peace.
Peace.